All right, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll go ahead and get started so we can keep with on time for the rest of the day as well. Thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you to those who were able to join the in-person keynote session yesterday as well. My name is John Elwell, and I serve as the Community Engagement Manager with the International Rescue Committee here in Virginia. I'll be facilitating our first session here today on community sponsorship. But before we get to that, I'd like for us all to take a brief moment of silence in recognition of the 2-year anniversary of the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So please mute yourselves and let's take that moment together now. All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for joining us on this early Saturday morning to talk about community sponsorship. We have three wonderful presenters who I'll introduce in a moment, and our goal is really to showcase the various forms of community sponsorship and the expansion of sponsorship as a means of welcoming newcomers into our communities. For our session, we'll have about 50 minutes, and we're going to start with each of our presenters taking some of that time to share on the various forms of community sponsorship, the various models, and also any perspectives they have to share on sponsorship as a model. We will be leaving ample time for questions at the end. So if you do have a question that pops up, please save those until each of our presenters has had a chance to speak. You can put those in the chat as well. I'll be monitoring those and can bring those back to the attention of our presenters at the end, but please save them until the end of our, at least the discussion with the presenters. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. Now to introduce our three presenters who were gracious enough to spend their time with us today. We have Malaz El-Amin, who is the Community Sponsorship Coordinator here at IRC in Richmond. We have Aubrey Grant, who is a founding member of the Community Sponsorship Hub and the Program Manager of Practice and Research. And we have Jennifer Carter, who is a Program Officer working in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration's Office of Admissions at the U.S. Department of State. Jen, that's a very long title.
It's a mouthful for sure.
So as I said earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to allow each of our three presenters some time to talk about the different forms of sponsorship, if there's a specific model that they want to highlight, and then also to share their perspectives on sponsorship as a model moving forward. And again, please save your questions. Go ahead and put them in the chat, and we can bring those to the attention of our presenters once we get through all three of our presenters' speaking time to start. So to kick us off, Malaz El-Amin from the IRC, if you want to get us started with talking about co-sponsorship through resettlement agencies, the current IRC model, and I can share my screen. I have your presentation right here. All right, can everyone see this? Can we get thumbs up? All right, thank you. All right, Malaz, just give me a signal when you want me to move the slide for you.
Okay, sure. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry. Like John said, thank you guys so much for joining us on this very early Saturday, making time to learn more about co-sponsorship. So co-sponsorship is very different, I think, across a lot of programs, and it's different in resettlement. So with the IRC, we do co-sponsorship and within our program a certain way. So John, if you could. Okay, great. So generally what co-sponsorship is, or what community sponsorship really is a collaborative efforts between groups of people that work together to prepare for or support welcoming refugees to the area. So being able to have groups that are in the community that will support newcomers into the area is really important. And without that connection, it'll be really hard to establish that kind of relationship and be integrated in the community the way that we need newcomers to feel welcome. So that being said, with community sponsorship, that black circle that we just talked about, it kind of branches into different types of community sponsorship. So it could be community led, which we will hear from, I believe, later on. That's private sponsorship, like Welcome Corps, like Sponsor Circle. It is a private group in the community that take on co-sponsorship on their own. And there's also resettlement led agency, or resettlement agency led, which is like IRC. So our community sponsorship is called co-sponsorship. So I know, so original. So with community sponsorship, our program is co-sponsorship, and we have another kind of community support, which is like a support team. So that differs from co-sponsorship. While co-sponsorship focuses on a lot of the core services, the support team kind of focuses a lot on like wraparound things that they could do in the community, things that they could kind of learn in their spare time. It's not super essential, but it's also important. Okay, great. So 22 out of, I believe now is 28 offices with the IRC is are doing co-sponsorship or implementing that co-sponsorship program within their offices. As you can see, in Virginia, there are 2 IRC offices. There's one in Charlottesville and one in Richmond. Charlottesville is very, co-sponsorship has been there because it's an older office. It's been there for such a long time. It's very successful. Having that community to be able to integrate immediately as newcomers it's shown a lot of success for the clients that we have. So co-sponsorship at the IRC. So it's a structured community group. So these groups are recruited basically by IRC, and they go through a very structured program. There's a non-legal binding agreement that they agree to support the clients through their journey. And the journey is about 6 months. So they are ensuring the provision of the majority of, or all of the core services that is required by PRM for them to become co-sponsored, or to for the clients to become self-sufficient. That's what I'm trying to say. So it is overseen by the community sponsorship coordinator at the IRC, and all of the Richmond staff will be working together with a minimum of 8 core services. A lot of groups do a lot more than 8 core services. A lot of them do majority of the core services, especially because a lot of them kind of intertwine and overlap. And that is performed within their co-sponsor period, which again is 6 months. So again, the most important things that we look at when it comes to recruiting our co-sponsored groups are the time. So they need to be able to commit not only 6 months, but within that 6 months, it's about once a week, if not a couple more times a week, to be able to complete these core services. They're able to commit to being able to provide resources for our clients and a group size. So our group size is generally 6 to 10 individuals, and that is because we want to have the groups be able to divide the work for them to efficiently support the clients. So what the groups go through, or the process that leads them to be able to become co-sponsors at the IRC, is being able to do background checks, pass all of the background checks for every member of the group. They need to assign a team lead, and that team lead will be the one in contact mainly with the community sponsorship coordinator at the IRC. There are training, a lot of, I believe it's a 5-hour training for the co-sponsor group to be able to feel supported and have a general great foundation of what is expected of them, and kind of what to expect with clients. A lot of co-sponsor groups have never interacted with newcomers, so it's really important for them to have. And then co-sponsor agreements, there's forms about safeguarding policies and things like that are really important for us to make sure that they're signed for the safety of our clients and also for the safety of our groups. A co-sponsorship coordinator will be monitoring and having oversight over what will be going on with the groups. There is a financial contribution, just like the private sponsorship. So IRC's financial contribution is, I believe, $3,000 up to $5,000 to support the clients coming in. That can differ for different offices within different states. Of course, that depends on housing and things like that, because mainly that financial contribution mainly goes towards housing support. And then case file documentations. It's really important to document what's happening, what went on, what was done by the co-sponsor groups, in order for us to track that in the case files for each client. Okay, so the timeline, it's a lot. It's a lot of things happening, and they do take some time. So we received the application, and they attended an information session at the IRC, just to kind of see what they're getting themselves into. It's a big commitment, so it's really important for people to know what to expect. And then we set up a one-on-one meeting to review the application, make sure that each person has the time and the commitment and the resources. And it's also, it's a lot to deal with newcomers that also are dealing with a lot of things. So it's really important for them to be able to get that understanding. Again, it's a 5-hour training, so 2.5-hour training sessions. And that also includes like cultural orientations and things like that, to make sure that our clients are also being respected within their respective cultures and backgrounds. There's background checks for each volunteer or each co-sponsor member. That also takes some time. And then we make sure that the co-sponsor is ready. Then we will be able to match them with a client. So co-sponsorship at the IRC is a pre-arrival program. So these groups are really being set up way before the clients even get there, or way before they get here. So these groups are recruited and trained, and they kind of sit in the pipeline until we find a family that we can match them with. That way, the support starts from the beginning. And of course, they sign all the agreements, working with minors, client confidentiality agreement, all of these very important things to safeguard the clients and also be able to support our co-sponsor teams. And so the team lead that is assigned by these groups will participate in a weekly check-in meeting. That's when we kind of talk and chat about what's been going on. Also be able to get those case notes that we need in order to put into our case files and things like that. So the difference between co-sponsorship and a lot of other support teams that we had in the past, this is a little bit different than having that kind of support team. We called them home teams, especially during the APA spike. So this is a little different where it's more of a structured program. So it has more robust training, cultural orientation, and also efficient communication on boundaries during the collaboration. And that's boundaries for both the clients and for the groups. It's important to understand that, yes, these groups can be able to support you, but only on certain things. It can get easy for the groups to get kind of carried away and be able to support clients in a way that it won't help with their self-sufficiency. So that's really important to make sure that the boundaries are drawn. And in the same way, clients need to be able to make sure that the groups are also having that boundary, and making sure that all of their boundaries that they have been set are being respected. Anything that violates IRC policies or doesn't commit to what we agreed to will be unfortunately dismissed. But basically with these groups, the thing that I really also think is really important is because it's a pre-arrival program, we're able to, when recruiting these groups, kind of look at the volunteer-based expertise. So if we have a nurse, a former nurse in the group, and we have or like a former educator, then we can then match them with a family that's coming in that needs those kinds of expertise. And that's really important. And it's really kind of creates a better path of success for both the groups and for the clients. The value of co-sponsorship, and this is also not just value of co-sponsorship at IRC, but generally community sponsorship, it really expands prescribed support for families in need. Caseworkers and everybody at the IRC or the staff can be able to support the clients, but having that community integration is really important to be able to connect and feel welcomed and be able to kind of thrive at a faster rate than just kind of being like, boom, 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 you got your all the benefits are applied for, and you're able to get your kids enrolled in school. You kind of need that connection with the community that's really vital and important. It also educates communities on a lot of, misconceptions or biases that is kind of around us, and it creates a better community and a better environment for everyone to be able to live in. And of course, better capacity for staff. Being able to have a group that takes on and supports clients is really important for them to be able to have capacity to also support other clients. Did I go over, John?
You're just about right. Thank you,
Okay,
Malaz. And she
great.
had her
Thank you so
question slide, but
much.
as we said, we're going to leave questions until the very end. So if you do have a question for Malaz on community sponsorship, the IRC model, anything like that, please go ahead and either jot that down or put it in the chat, and we'll bring that back up once all three of our presenters have had some time. So Aubrey, would you like to take up the mantle and go next? And if you have slides, I believe you should be able to share your, oh, perfect. There we go.
Can you hear me first off?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So it's actually Jen who's gonna start and then I'll jump
Okay.
in after Jen. Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. All right. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, John. It definitely is a mouthful. But I'm so honored by the invitation to join you all today. So I cover strategic engagement and outreach for the Welcome Corps at the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. So we call it PRM. I'm sure you're all quite familiar, but it's definitely one of the most rewarding jobs that I've ever had. I'm particularly proud to be speaking to this group today, to all of you in Richmond. One of the things I'm always most proud of when I'm serving overseas as a U.S. diplomat and representing the United States, so all of you, is highlighting the spirit of volunteerism and compassion that's at the core of the American ethos and modeled so brilliantly by all of you and the work that you do in your community. So thank you for your service and thank you for having me. To begin, I wanted to share some reflections on how the U.S. government is seeking to enhance and expand refugee resettlement through sponsorship. And my apologies, I'm recovering from a cold, so hopefully this is clear. As most of you know, for decades before Congress passed the Refugee Act of 1980, it was small groups of citizens all over the country, often organized and supported by religious organizations and institutions that formed the heart of refugee resettlement efforts. Long before we had a Refugee Act, we had churches, synagogues, mosques, and meetings whose congregants lived out their faith by opening their arms and hearts to the vulnerable. And as you heard from Malaz, that tradition continues proudly within our communities today. So when President Biden took office, he reaffirmed the United States' strong commitment to refugee resettlement and set a very ambitious goal of welcoming 125,000 refugees annually through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, or USRAP. I know you're all familiar with it. At the time, we were working with a dismantled domestic resettlement infrastructure. So building back required us to think creatively about the ways to meet the president's ambitious refugee resettlement goals, including by tapping into what some of us call a benevolence backlog of average citizens' generosity and compassion. Soon after taking office in January 2021, the president actually issued an executive order instructing the State Department to design a community-led private sponsorship program to complement the professional traditional resettlement agency support structure within the USRAP. So that's really important to us, that this program is a complement to the phenomenal work of IRC and other resettlement agency partners. We got to work immediately, and we're planning an early 2022 launch of our private sponsorship program when Kabul fell in August of 2021. So we immediately redirected our resources to mount the largest resettlement effort in U.S. history with the help of a large coalition of partner organizations. In just 6 months, we resettled over 82,000 Afghans, in part by deploying innovations we had been readying for the private sponsorship program. So as part of this effort, in October of 2021, we launched the Sponsor Circle program, a testament to our critical work with new partners. The program was a community-led innovation that unlocked critical capacity for resettlement for Afghans. By enabling everyday Americans to take the lead in welcoming Afghan newcomers, the Sponsor Circle program allowed us to tap into the energy and enthusiasm of ordinary Americans to quickly just expand our domestic resettlement capacity and help us strengthen efforts we could not do on our own. So we're proud that through the Sponsor Circle program, more than 200 sponsor circles welcomed Afghans across 35 states. And of course, that work continues to welcome Afghans. But these sponsor circles represented remarkable acts of engagement by everyday Americans from all walks of life, including a Vietnamese American coalition in Seattle, Washington, military veterans in Wickford, Rhode Island, and Farmington, New Mexico, faculty and staff at institutions of higher education in Montclair, New Jersey, and right around the corner in Williamsburg, Virginia, faith congregations in Denver, Colorado, and Huntsville, Alabama, and even groups of State Department staff in Washington who signed up in their personal capacities to help us welcome Afghans. And then, as we were reminded at the top of today's session, while we were hard at work on sponsor circles, we collectively pivoted again, this time to respond to the call to find solutions for Ukrainians fleeing Russia's illegal, aggressive invasion. With colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security to inform their thinking on how we could link sponsorship to non-resettlement temporary protection pathways like parole. So that result was Uniting for Ukraine, or U4U, an initiative that is still ongoing today. U4U enables Ukrainians to access streamlined humanitarian parole pathways initiated by private sponsors, who then in turn commit to providing support to the Ukrainians while they're here in the United States. So U4U represents another U.S. government effort to adapt a private sponsorship model and harness the widespread outpouring of interest from the American public to help those in need. Through U4U, we've welcomed nearly 176,000 Ukrainians, and I actually think that number is out of date. I think it's even higher. But further demonstrating the enormous potential of private sponsorship as a policy innovation that can effectively leverage the capacity of motivated community individuals to welcome newcomers. The success of U4U also helped us launch the process for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, also called CHNV parole, to address irregular migration and create additional safe, legal, and orderly processes for people fleeing humanitarian crises to lawfully come to the United States for a period of up to 2 years. I could talk about CHNV all day, but I won't, because that's not the topic of our discussion. Our work across all of these new sponsorship-driven initiatives both validated our original idea of the administration to employ private sponsorship as a new model for refugee resettlement and gave us the confidence that this approach would be successful. So all of that really long-winded background culminated in the January 2023 launch of the Welcome Corps, a private sponsorship program that empowers everyday Americans to welcome refugees arriving to the United States and support their resettlement directly. We are so proud of what the Welcome Corps has accomplished so far in its first year. For example, in just the first year, more than 15,000 Americans came forward and applied to welcome more than 7,000 refugees around the world to our country. And that number has only grown. I think we're at more than 40,000 today. So it's really incredible. The establishment of the Welcome Corps delivers on President Biden's initial directive that community-led efforts become a fixture of our resettlement program, which, unlike parole sponsorship, provides a path to citizenship in the United States. Welcome Corps is designed to be an enduring feature of the U.S. RAP, building on the lessons learned and the best practices of the programs that have come before and those we pursue in other paths like traditional resettlement. I'll turn it over to Aubrey in just a second from the Community Sponsorship Hub, who implements this incredible, innovative program for us, to tell you more about the details of the Welcome Corps. But let me take one more minute to share some closing thoughts about the power of the Welcome Corps from our perch at the State Department. As Secretary Blinken has said, from neighbors in San Diego who came together to help a refugee family from East Africa settle into their new community, to former refugees in Texas who wanted to give others the same opportunities they had after fleeing persecution in Sudan, the Welcome Corps is transforming the way that refugees are resettled. By recruiting private sponsors, the Welcome Corps is allowing us to expand resettlement beyond the traditional 100-mile radius of resettlement agencies. In December, we opened an application portal to allow Americans to identify and name specific refugees they wish to sponsor and refer for resettlement, which is a first in the history of the U.S. RAP. And through the umbrella of the Welcome Corps, we're innovating with dedicated initiatives that empower sponsors to specifically support refugee students who are pursuing higher education and skilled refugees. We ultimately hope that the Welcome Corps will help us build a broader, deeper base of support for refugee resettlement. By creating an avenue to involve everyday Americans directly in the work of resettlement, we believe Welcome Corps members will become strong advocates and ambassadors for refugee resettlement in their own communities throughout the country. Excuse me. Like the Peace Corps, we hope the Welcome Corps will be will become a widely resonant, inspiring, and iconic American institution rooted in our values, generosity, compassion, and volunteerism. And we hope, most of all, that building a broad grassroots base of support through the Welcome Corps will enshrine refugee resettlement alongside baseball and apple pie as an American tradition. It's an ambitious goal, to be sure, and we need organizations like Reestablish Richmond and all of you to help us do it. I look forward to taking your questions later. Let me turn it over to Aubrey now that I've kind of bungled my powerful closing. Grab a glass of water. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm also really excited to be here with you today. My name is Aubrey Grant, and I work at the Community Sponsorship Hub. The Community Sponsorship Hub is dedicated to growing the role of communities through community sponsorship. So we've heard from, the IRC and now the State Department about community sponsorship, but I thought it might be helpful to take a step back and just identify what exactly community sponsorship is. And I'm actually going to, can you see just the slides or can you see my presenter? Okay. So community sponsorship is about bringing forcibly displaced persons to the United States and having a group approach support them as they resettle into their local communities. The State Department defines it as an umbrella term through which various models sit underneath kind of to inform and have different kind of programmatic features of them. And we kind of got an overview of that today. Just again, to reiterate this kind of powerful kind of diagram, there are two very kind of broad categories of community sponsorship: the resettlement agency led and the community led. The distinction here is that on the resettlement agency led, whether they're support teams or the co-sponsorship, which it's really exciting to see the IRC's model today, these programs are where the resettlement agency takes on the responsibilities of providing core resettlement services and might then partner with the local groups to serve as additional kind of supports for those cases. On the community-led side, it's groups across the United States who come together and they take on that direct responsibility of welcoming newcomers into their community. And it builds on the long, strong, and rich history of resettlement in the United States that even predates kind of the resettlement agency approach. So it's really merging it and having additional pathway to add capacity and learning from best practices that resettlement agencies like the IRC have created over the past several decades. So the Welcome Core program, as you can see, and I'll go back to this diagram for just a second. So on the community-led program, there's the Sponsor Circle program, which Jen mentioned was created and launched to support Afghans arriving through Operation Allies Welcome. Although not required, the Community Sponsorship Hub has extended that program to support Ukrainians, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. We have also worked with the U.S. government to help lead and launch on the Welcome Core on campus and Welcome Core, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment. Just to say, I'm also very excited by the kind of map that Malay showed that identified all the co-sponsorship programs in the U.S. Co-sponsorship program has been a part of the fabric of the U.S. refugee admissions program since it was created in 1980. In the Community Sponsorship Hub, we also support local resettlement agencies and national resettlement agencies across the country to provide resources and assistance to their programs to ensure that we're getting as many Americans involved at whatever capacity they have in supporting newcomers. So I'm going to talk really about Welcome Core today, and I will briefly touch on Welcome Core on campus. So as Jen mentioned, Welcome Core is a new service opportunity for Americans. It's inspired for Americans inspired to welcome those fleeing persecution and seeking safety. And in return, as we heard from Liz, it strengthens our own kind of communities when Americans step up to welcome newcomers. It is a public-private partnership, and it's inspired by what America represents to so many around the world, and that's a beacon of hope and refuge. This program is a program of this Department of State Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. It's implemented by a consortium of organizations with deep expertise in resettlement, and it's led by the Community Sponsorship Hub. Within this model of Welcome Core, the role of private sponsor groups is really to take on that direct responsibility and kind of the core role of resettling and welcoming newcomers to their community. So private sponsor groups are made up of 5 or more U.S. citizens or U.S. residents living in the same community. They commit to providing resettlement services to refugees they sponsor for a minimum of 90 days. So this kind of, again, is the time frame through which refugees receive services through the U.S. Refugee Reception and Placement Program. They also complete kind of a robust set of trainings and go through other requirements before welcoming. And throughout the process, they are supported by, and I'll get to that in a minute, organizations who have experience in refugee resettlement. They also raise funds to support the effort, and they submit 30 and 90-day reports to us to ensure that those core resettlement services were conducted. So you might ask, we've been talking a lot about what are resettlement services. So these are things that I think you likely, if you volunteered before, perhaps have heard about, or if you've served through the IRC's co-sponsorship program or your organization has supported in a way, you've probably seen kind of some of the images coming out about groups of individuals welcoming newcomers as they arrive at the airport. So it's picking individuals up at the airport. It's helping identify housing. It's helping individuals navigate your local community using public transit or helping them use other resources to get around. It's about making those cultural connections, supporting them as they improve or learn English, helping them access employment, helping facilitate and kind of help them learn the U.S. medical infrastructure, and helping them do things that we all do on a daily basis, grocery shop, and things we do more or less routinely, like going and getting an ID or a driver's license. So these are things that communities have the capacity to do and know so well. There are two ways to sponsor through Welcome Corps. One is something we call the matching process, and it's where individuals, sponsor groups come together and then are paired with refugees who they do not know. So a lot like Malay's talked about with the co-sponsorship program, it's that matching to a group and a refugee family together. The other way is that individuals can apply to refer and sponsor a refugee they know abroad. So a couple of things to dive in. I'm not going to go through all of this for time, but if there's specific questions, happy to go through it. Through the matching process, individuals fill out kind of information about themselves, their community, and their kind of capacity to welcome. Within that, you can identify if you have a certain strength or a unique skill set that might be helpful that you would like to use to help kind of with the matching. So for instance, you speak Spanish and you would love to welcome someone who's also a Spanish speaker, or you are able to welcome a large size family or a single parent with young children. You can identify some of these, your capacity and preferences through the process. And then the Welcome Corps team uses this information to make the best possible match and ensure kind of a wonderful experience for you and the newcomers that you're welcoming, the refugees you're welcoming. Quick note on this, we do ask individuals to be open-minded and flexible because preferences can delay the process. And the goal of Welcome Corps is to really help build and expand capacity and resettle refugees as quickly as possible. The other way is to sponsor someone you know, sponsor a refugee you know abroad. And important to note here, again, I'm not going to get into all this, but I can go through it if it's helpful during the Q&A session. But individuals coming in through this have to meet the refugee eligibility criteria. We have a really cool tool on our website that you can kind of provide information and it will walk through the process with you. But just to note here, they can live outside, they have to live outside their country of origin, or if they have no nationality in the last habitual residence, they cannot be living in the United States. They have to be in a country where the US government is able to process their cases, be over the age of 18, or being referred with a parent or a legal guardian and have not been denied for admission to the US refugee admissions program previously. Another important note, they have to be registered through the unit government in the country they live before September 30th of 2023, or be refugees of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, or Venezuela, and have an I-134 or 134A submitted before September 30th. Really throughout the process, sponsors are supported from the application and just going through kind of this eligibility. We have resources to help you with that. So it's really important that this is not something that groups of individuals are taking on alone. You have resources available and kind of what we call private sponsor organizations who really kind of walk you through the process. They support, provide oversight, and mentorship. In addition to that, pre-arrival, we have extensive resources to help through the application process and resources to help with training and preparing for the refugees you're welcoming. And then afterwards, we have a set of resources to help you along that sponsorship journey. One quick note I want to have here, because it's something we always get asked in the Q&A session, so I'm just going to go and touch on it while I'm presenting. So we are committed to preventing fraud within US RAP and protecting the integrity of the US immigration system. And just a quick note, refugees undergo, and you all probably know this very well if you've worked with a refugee resettlement in the past, they undergo a very rigorous security and robust security screening process. And so kind of at the same time, we have a process in place to also kind of do background checks and checks on the sponsors themselves. In addition to that, we are currently actively out in the community. I'm actually in Texas right now. I had the opportunity on Thursday to meet with co-sponsorship programs across Texas. And now I'm meeting with students who are just wanting to get involved in different kind of resettlement pathways, whether it's co-sponsorship or Welcome Corps. And so just to say, we are out in the community spreading the word that Welcome Corps is free for refugees. No one should pay for anything from the application process to kind of being referred to the system. And so if someone is asking a refugee to pay, it's a scam. And we have developed a fraudulent email address that I'm putting down there. I'll also put it in the chat for you all, because we really want to spread the word in the community. If you hear something, say something. I'm kind of a New Yorker, so this is kind of the motto we have. It's the same within Welcome Corps. Really quickly, and I know I'm kind of over time, but want to just also identify that Welcome Corps on campus was launched in July. It's an expansion of the Welcome Corps program that leverages the U.S. higher education institutions' capacity to serve as resettlement spaces and provide academic opportunities for refugee students. And so this process is also a public-private partnership made up of, it's a program of the U.S. Department of State, and it is led by a consortium of, it's led by the Community Sponsorship Hub, and a consortium of actors implement it who have a deep kind of experience and knowledge in higher education. Really just want to end on the aims of Welcome Corps and Welcome Corps on campus, and really the aims of co-sponsorship are to equip and empower Americans to welcome refugee newcomers. So whether it's co-sponsor support teams, Welcome Corps on campus, and even Sponsor Circle program, we really just want to provide opportunities for Americans to get involved in welcoming and enable community groups, organizations, colleges, and other kind of agencies to support in the welcoming work. Thank you so much.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Malaz. We have about 12 to 15 minutes available for questions. We want to leave a few minutes at the end for people to take a quick break if they need it before the next session starts. But we do have some time for questions. So if you do have a question, you can either put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. Please, if you do have a question, either address it to the group of our presenters, or if you specifically want to ask Aubrey, Jen, or Malaz a question, specifically address it to one of them. I do have a couple questions if we need a starter question, because sometimes we need a starter question to get going. But if anyone does have a question to get us started, please go ahead and either type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
I'm going to take the speaker right of and thank Ellen, give Ellen a shout out for asking such good questions so early in the morning as my coffee is kicking in. But I'm gonna direct the first one to Aubrey because I think we lost the time in our presentation. But what benefits do students in the Welcome Corps on campus receive, Aubrey?
Yeah, great. So students coming in Welcome Corps on campus is a little bit different. They come into a local kind of college or higher education institution. And so are walking into like these kind of little hubs of communities already, right? And so through the program, it is a 12-month minimum commitment, but those higher education institutions have to have kind of a plan to support those refugee students to go through the academic process and kind of get their degrees. So each campus is a little bit different. They still receive some of those core kind of resettlement services that you would see in kind of Welcome Corps on campus. But in addition to that, they also receive kind of benefits and programs that the kind of campuses have. So airport reception, financial support, housing, basic necessities. They get those essential documentations, connections to student groups, and kind of the academic kind of resources on campus for them. But then they do get support for a minimum of 12 months with a plan to continue supporting them across their kind of education, journey. I'm not sure if Ellen that answered specifically your question. If there was something kind of more detailed, yeah.
Well, my student's already here. She's at Randolph-Macon, and she's 20. So she did come in across the border as unaccompanied minor, but she's so she's in the system already. She has permission to work, but I just wondered that's why I was asking about what
Oh.
benefits it. Like I do sponsor her already, but without it being formal. But I just wondered if there was something extra she could get through Welcome Corps.
Yeah, I'm going to put my email in the chat and I'm happy to kind of connect you with resources. So Welcome Corps on campus, students coming in through that process have not yet arrived. So this is a program where there's overseas component that can bring students in. So they'll be coming this academic fall, this academic 2024, 2025. It's crazy to think that we're already in that kind of academic year, but they'll be coming in the fall. However, with that being said, what we tapped into was already this wealth of resources available to kind of immigrants, undocumented migrants, in addition to kind of those coming in who are on refugee status. So I'm happy. I'm going to put my email in the chat, Ellen. I'd love to connect with you and make sure we link you into some kind of resources available for her. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Yeah.
Oh, likewise.
And in the chat here, we have a comment from Marilyn Breslow about a concern around cultural orientation and interpretation for the new arrivals. It takes well-versed bilingual staff to communicate what is important, what's new. If anyone wants to kind of comment on that comment or address those concerns or anything.
I'm happy to jump in, Jen, unless you want to take it. No. Okay, so we understand really the importance of communication, language, and ensuring that people have adequate and interpretation upon arrival to really help kind of navigate these really difficult processes. So we do have within the Welcome Corps program, the private sponsor organizations help the private sponsor groups identify resources for them to ensure that they're getting culturally competent services and interpretation. So it's not just about having interpretation, but having kind of interpreters that are kind of culturally and linguistically competent. So we have that. We go through a lot of the training, provide some information on that, but that is one of the things that the private sponsor groups have to kind of prepare and plan for. Any kind of medical appointment, things like that, that individuals are taken to, they obviously can use the language line and kind of making sure that they have someone who's trained and able to respond to those kind of questions. So any kind of service they're providing, the service provider should provide that. Anything outside of that, the private sponsor groups themselves have to have a plan of action, and that is reviewed with their private sponsor organization to ensure that it is culturally and linguistically appropriate.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, just since I don't see any other immediate questions, is just yes. I think one of the things that I am so proud of with the Welcome Corps and the work CSH and the consortium are doing is we are providing that kind of white glove support for sponsors, that we really want to make sure that this is a good experience, not just for the refugees. Of course, that is so important, but also for the sponsors to make sure that they are equipped with what they need. So that's something that's, as you saw, Aubrey's immediately offering her email address to answer questions. Like, we really do care very much about making sure that folks get answers to questions that they have and are receiving the best services. So
I also love what's happening in the chat here where you're tapping into the community, which is the whole point of like all of the community sponsorship is the resources are there. We're here to help build those points of connections and kind of provide some guidance. The other thing I'll say, just because you mentioned cultural orientation too, is we do work with CORE, who is the organization that provides those resources to resettlement agencies. And they have toolkits that are for sponsors that are kind of how to infuse cultural kind of messaging and orientation into like different appointments they might be going to. So as you're sitting at DSS and waiting for your appointment, what are things that you could be talking about that are, again, kind of helping infuse it and share some of that knowledge?
Well, if we don't have any immediate questions that pop up, I'd just like to ask, so with sponsorship, whether it's a resettlement agency model or Welcome Corps, we know that the main goal is serving the family, obviously, and supporting them on their path to self-sufficiency. But I think we can all probably agree that sponsorship is just as valuable for the sponsor groups themselves and their local communities. So if any of the three of you want to maybe expand a little bit on how sponsorship helps to build stronger, inclusive communities, and what you see that kind of moving forward in the next couple of years.
Oh gosh, Sean, that's my favorite topic. I could talk about it all day. I think that I'm trying to think of a succinct example to share. I would say one is one of our first Welcome Corps arrivals, and I'm always worried I'm butchering the name of the town, but no one's corrected me yet, is in Oneida, New York. I think that's how you say it. But it very much is a town that has seen, lower birth rates and lower decline, and the town's getting smaller. And so the community really banded together, and we're thinking of creative ways that they could solve that. And I think, Welcome Corps for them was one of the options. And so they've welcomed, I think 2 sponsor groups have formed already and welcomed refugees, and there are more forming. And it's a town, quite small town. And so that to me is always such a great testament of, we really are with the Welcome Corps responding to the desire that's already there. We're not creating this program from scratch. This isn't something that, we're the US government and we're here to help. We're coming in with all our solutions. We really are facilitating what's needed in communities, which is bringing in new people, bringing in those new cultures, those new individuals to build the fabric of America, to build that melting pot, to build those strong intercultural communities. So that's my big example. I would say, other than that, we really see the economic power that refugees bring to the United States. This is, of course, really important humanitarian work, protecting those and offering refuge to those who are fleeing horrible situations overseas or, personal danger. But this isn't all altruistic. Refugees make this country stronger. They make this country better. HHS just put out a report last week, I think, already just last week, saying over the last 15 years, refugees have contributed $124 billion to the United States economy. So this is not something that, isn't in our benefit. Refugees make this country stronger. They're part of what drives American competitiveness on the global stage. And so that's something we always talk about. I bet Aubrey, being closer to the community than from my perch, has better, personal examples. So I'll turn it over to her.
It's really interesting because what we've seen kind of in building off the kind of experiences of the sponsor circle program as we moved into Welcome Corps, and really building off the strengths of co-sponsorship over the past several decades, is that these groups provide kind of immediate social capital to newcomers coming in that really helps them network, and so kind of helps them build out and kind of deepen integration over time. From first job, being able to find employment in industries within the same kind of field as those that they may have had before being resettled, to kind of just really connecting with community members. So we did a survey actually on the sponsor circle program to better understand kind of when refugees come in, and this was for Afghans, like who they were engaging with. And it's really interesting, of those who completed the survey, 90% were having dinner on a routine basis with members of their diaspora at the 1 year mark. And then 95% were eating dinner on a routine basis with members outside of their diaspora. So I think it just really shows the transformative power and the long-term relationships that are built. I'm kind of a network analysis geek, and so love the idea of social networks, but I really do think it shows that kind of these the individuals coming in who have resources and a community of support that wraps around them, it really does strengthen both their short-term kind of support networks and their longer-term support networks. And Ellen, you can probably answer this from the work that you're doing, and all of you, kind of the experiences that you've had anecdotally. But yeah, we really do see kind of community sponsorship in its various forms really supporting individuals longer term, but having profound impacts on kind of their experiences, integration, and kind of just, yeah, kind of, and the communities themselves. Sorry, I didn't even talk about that. So we did in our survey, we also asked, and overwhelmingly, the majority of participants said they're now stronger to their community than they were before, and they're stronger to their group, and the members in their groups, they had stronger connections than before. So we also see it really strengthening the community. And there's a question in the chat, which I think kind of dovetails off of this, about are there networks in place where individuals can find like-minded individuals? We don't have like a kind of a meetup or something like that. What I will say is we have had through the Welcome Corps program, individuals come together that just lived on the same street and were a neighborhood where they kind of started talking about this. We've had individuals who were kind of connected through their children's soccer team and things like that. So I think you can get really creative. I mean, honestly, you could probably start a meetup to just kind of start talking with people and educating the public about this program. And I'm sure through that would be able to find some like-minded individuals. But yeah, we don't have like a meetup set up that, you know, I think it's called Meetup is the app. But yeah, Jen, you might have more.
Meetup, and then actually we do have not a formal meetup mechanism. That's something that, you know, I think maybe longer term. You're not the first person, Sharon, to ask about that. We get the question all the time. But CSH actually did develop, and I think it's still on our website, Aubrey. If not, maybe we can send it to Sharon. A really fantastic initiative called Dine for Refugees. And it really was this kind of idea that, you know, maybe there are people that you're already friends with who are interested in this and you just don't know, it's never come up. And so you can host a dinner or you can host a potluck. It can look like lots of things. Frankly, it doesn't even have to be food related. That's just what our concept was. But it was this idea that, you know, maybe you can bring together a group of people that might be interested and talk through what this really would mean. And within the guide, there are kind of guided questions about what you should be asking, what you should consider if you're forming a sponsor group with people that maybe you aren't as close to, or you don't have that built-in, you know, network, as you said. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I also think we've heard from sponsors. I have two thoughts, one on this. But we've heard from sponsors that they just posted on Facebook of like, hey, like I've heard about this program called the Welcome Corps, and I'm really interested. Has anybody else heard of it? Is anyone interested? And people have responded in the comments and they've linked up that way. So that's one. And then I would say back to probably John's original question, we have heard from every single sponsor without exception that this program has changed their lives, that it's not just about what they've done for the refugees or how they've supported the refugees, all of the things that they've gained from it, as Aubrey said, kind of a sense of community, a sense of purpose. There's a really great quote that I'm blanking on the, you know, whole formality of it, but our assistant secretary likes to use, but it really is, you know, the sponsor saying, this family, they're everything to us now. You know, this really has changed our whole life and we want to keep doing this work. And I think you all know that better than I could ever tell you. So hopefully that's helpful. And I'm not sure if it's on our website. If not, maybe we can send it.
Yeah, so if you want to, my email's in the chat, I can, and maybe actually, John, if it's possible, if everybody that's in this session, we could send out that. It's not currently, we did it in the fall as people were gathering for like Thanksgiving and some of those holidays. But so I don't see it as a toolkit currently on the website. So I'll double check on that, make sure we get it back up there. If it's not, I might just not be able to find it right now. But if possible, I can send it out through if you have a email thread with everybody. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, great. That we're just about time to switch over to the next session, but thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much, Aubrey, and thank you, Malaz, and thank you everyone for being here. You have just a few minutes of a break before we start the next session, which will be purposeful play in the preschool classroom. But thank you all so much for being here, and definitely, I'm sure you can keep putting some questions in the chat if Jen and Aubrey might stick around for at least a few minutes to answer anything that might pop up after that. But thank you all so much for being here, and I think this was a wonderful discussion.